The termination letter was still sitting on the hospital administrator's desk when Walter Briggs walked out through the sliding glass doors. For the last time, carrying nothing but a worn canvas duffel bag and a small clay handprint his 9-year-old son had made in second-grade art class. The one Walter kept on his desk because Owen had pressed too hard on the left side, and the thumb came out crooked, which made it look exactly like Owen. Behind him, the fluorescent corridors hummed with the usual rhythm of the Hendricks Medical Center. Somewhere a cart rattled, somewhere a phone rang twice and stopped. Nobody came after him. A few nurses glanced up from their stations as he passed, then looked back down. That was the whole goodbye, a few sideways glances, and the sound of his own shoes on polished linoleum. The people who noticed him leave that afternoon said different things later. Some said he was burning out and everyone could see it coming. Some said he was reckless, walking away from a staff physician position without anything lined up. A couple of the younger residents said nothing at all, which was the most honest reaction of the three. None of them knew what Walter had read 3 nights earlier in a text message from his son's school counselor. None of them had seen Owen, sitting alone on the front steps of their house at 7 in the evening, still in his backpack, because he had forgotten his key again, and Walter was still at the hospital, doing a double shift that had started the day before. Owen had sat there for 2 hours. He hadn't called anyone, he'd just waited, the way kids do when they've learned that waiting is the only option they have. Walter found out about it from a neighbor, not from Owen. Owen didn't mention it at all. That was the part that kept Walter awake. He had spent 11 years at Hendricks. He came up through emergency medicine, moved into internal after his wife Laura passed away from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer 4 years ago, because emergency work had become something he couldn't sustain emotionally. Too many situations that reminded him of the last months in the ICU, the machines, the terrible patience of it. Internal medicine was steadier, it let him breathe. Or so he told himself. What it actually did was give him longer shifts, and more administrative overlap, and an on-call rotation that seemed designed by someone who didn't believe physicians had homes to return to. He covered for colleagues. He stayed late when the floor was understaffed, which was often. He took the cases nobody wanted because he was good at them, and because saying no felt like failing somehow, like Laura's death had left him, with a debt he was trying to pay to the universe, by making himself useful at every possible hour. What he didn't notice, or didn't let himself notice, was that Owen was growing up in the margins, in the hour before school, in the 40 minutes before Walter's pager went off, in the text messages Walter sent at 11 p.m., saying still at the hospital, leftovers in the fridge, love you, which Owen always answered with a thumbs-up emoji, because he was 9, and thumbs-up was the appropriate response when you'd already said goodnight to an empty house. The school counselor's name was Ms. Abernathy. Her message was 3 sentences long. She said Owen had been quiet in group activities. She said he'd written an essay about his weekend, that described, in very careful handwriting, a Saturday he spent alone reheating soup and watching the same movie twice because he forgot he'd already seen it. She said she wasn't alarmed, just wanted Walter to know. Walter read the message standing in the hospital parking garage at midnight, still in his coat. He stood there for a long time. The next morning he walked into the office of Sylviane Dupree, the chief medical officer of Hendricks, and submitted his resignation. Sylviane barely looked up from her monitor. She asked if his cases were documented. He said they were. She said someone from HR would be in touch. That was the conversation. 11 years, and that was the conversation. Walter told himself it was fine. He drove home, picked Owen up from school early, and took him to the diner on Carver Street, where they used to go on Sundays before Laura got sick. Owen ordered the same thing he always ordered, a grilled cheese with the crusts cut off and a chocolate milk, and he looked at his father across the table, with an expression Walter couldn't quite read. Not surprise, something more careful than surprise. You're home early, Owen said. I'm going to be home earlier from now on, Walter said. Owen picked up his sandwich and thought about this. Then he said, like, every day. Walter said. Owen nodded slowly, the way he did when processing information he wanted to believe but wasn't entirely sure about yet. He took a bite, he chewed. Then he said, okay, and the word came out so careful and small that Walter had to look out the window for a second. The weeks that followed were the first stretch of ordinary time Walter had known in years. He walked Owen to school in the mornings instead of rushing him to the before care program at 7. He learned that Owen liked to take a specific route past a house on Elm that had a very old golden retriever named Captain, who always came to the fence. He learned that Owen had opinions about lunchboxes, strong ones, and that the particular combination of a fruit cup and a cheese stick was, according to Owen, a really sad lunch. He fixed this. He started making actual lunches. He didn't know he'd been doing it wrong until he had the time to notice. He took on some freelance work, independent medical reviews, second-hand consultations for attorneys on medical documentation cases, work he could do from home between school drop-off and pickup. It paid less than half what he'd made at Hendricks. The math was uncomfortable and getting worse. But in the evenings he sat at the kitchen table with Owen, while Owen did homework, and sometimes they argued gently about whether a particular math approach made sense, and those arguments were the best part of Walter's day, and he knew it. One afternoon he took Owen to the park, and they sat on the same bench where Walter used to bring him, when he was small enough to need a hand getting onto the seat. Owen was too big for that now. He sat there eating a melting popsicle, watching a group of younger kids on the climbing structure, and he said, out of nowhere, "Dad, do you miss the hospital?" Walter thought about it honestly. "I miss feeling like I was good at something," he said. Owen looked at him. "You're good at making grilled cheese now," he said. He said it completely seriously. Then after a second he smiled, just a little, and Walter laughed, and Owen laughed too, and it was the first time in a while that Walter had heard his own laugh and recognized it. But money doesn't pause for park benches and popsicles. By the 6th week, Walter was looking at his accounts, with the particular anxiety of someone who has ignored something long enough that it has become a different, larger problem. The freelance work wasn't scaling the way he'd hoped. The mortgage on the house was not a small number. Owen needed new glasses, had needed them for longer than Walter realized, which was its own private guilt. The pediatric optometrist was not covered by the plan Walter had cobbled together after leaving Hendricks. He sold a watch. Not his wedding ring, he couldn't do that, but a nice watch Laura had given him for his 40th birthday, the last one she was alive for. He got a fair price for it at a shop on Montgomery. He drove home and didn't tell Owen. He just ordered the glasses online that night, and paid the shipping upgrade so they'd arrive faster. 3 weeks after that, on a Tuesday afternoon, Walter was at the auto shop on Decker Avenue, doing a warranty check on his car, when a woman walked in who did not look like someone who visited auto shops on Tuesdays. She was wearing a gray blazer over a silk blouse, and carrying a phone in each hand, and she moved through the waiting room, the way people move when they've decided that waiting is something that happens to other people. Her name was Celeste Okafor, and Walter didn't know who she was. He would find out later that she was the regional director of operations for a healthcare management group called Ardent Wellness Partners, which oversaw 7 hospitals in the tri-state area, including Hendricks Medical Center. At that moment she was just a woman in a very expensive blazer looking at her phone with the expression of someone whose Tuesday had not gone the way she intended. Her car was in the bay. She sat down 2 seats away from Walter and made 3 calls in a row, none of which resolved whatever she was managing, and each one ended with her putting the phone face down on her knee and breathing very deliberately. After the 3rd call, there was a silence. Walter said, without particularly thinking about it, "The breathing thing works better if you count to 4 on the exhale." Celeste looked at him. "Sorry," he said. "Old habit, I'm a doctor." "Were you talking to me?" she said. "There's no one else in the waiting room," he said. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was trying to decide between offended and amused, and landed somewhere in between. 4 seconds, she said. 4 seconds, he said. She tried it. She breathed out, slowly counting. Something in her shoulders moved slightly. "That's mildly irritating," she said. "How well that works." "Most useful things are," he said. That was the beginning of it, though neither of them would have described it that way at the time. They ended up talking for 40 minutes while her car was worked on. She asked what kind of doctor. He said internal medicine, recently former. She asked why former. He gave her the short version. The honest short version, which included Owen, the school counselor, the steps. And she listened in a way that most people don't, without looking at her phone, without nodding too quickly the way people do when they're constructing their response, instead of hearing yours. When his car was ready, he said it had been nice talking to her. She gave him her card. He didn't call. He told himself he wasn't sure why. He put the card in the front pocket of his canvas jacket and forgot about it, or tried to. He had enough complicated things in his life, without adding someone who carried 2 phones, and had the kind of composure that suggested she'd built walls around herself, very carefully, and over a long time. What he didn't know was what was happening at Hendrix during those same weeks. The hospital had been expanding its partnership with Ardent Wellness Partners, which meant Celeste Okafor had significant authority over operational decisions, including personnel, and the internal medicine floor at Hendrix had, in the 2 months since Walter left, begun experiencing what could only be described as a quiet unraveling. Cases that should have been caught early were being flagged late. Readmission rates ticked up. A complicated diagnostic situation with a long-term patient went sideways in a way that a more experienced physician might have caught in the first pass. Nothing catastrophic. But the cumulative pattern was the kind of thing that shows up in reports and makes people in positions like Celeste ask pointed questions. She asked pointed questions, and the name that kept coming up, in the records, in the retrospective reviews, in the quiet admissions from department heads, who didn't want to be quoted directly, was Walter Briggs. Celeste pulled his file. She read his 11-year record at Hendrix with the methodical attention she gave to everything. Impeccable diagnostic accuracy. Consistent patient outcomes in the top quartile. 0 malpractice history. Employee reviews that used words like irreplaceable, so often it had stopped meaning anything, because the people writing them clearly never acted like they meant it. She looked at his last 6 months of scheduling records, and felt something she wasn't entirely comfortable naming. A slow, building recognition of what it looked like when an institution extracted everything from a person, and then expressed surprise when that person was gone. She thought about the auto shop. She thought about the way he talked about his son. She drove to his neighborhood on a Wednesday evening, without calling ahead. She wasn't sure why she didn't call, possibly because she was afraid he'd say no over the phone, which was easier than saying no in person, and she had learned over the years that the hardest conversations had to happen face to face. Possibly for other reasons she wasn't examining closely. His house was a modest 2-story on a quiet street, not far from the elementary school, which she realized made practical sense. The porch light was on. Through the front window she could see the warm interior light of a kitchen and the shadow movement of people inside. She knocked. Walter opened the door. He was in a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, holding a dish towel, and behind him she could see a counter, with the remains of what looked like a real dinner, not takeout containers, actual cooking, and Owen at the kitchen table, with a worksheet and a pencil, and his glasses, which were new, slightly large for his face, and made him look extraordinarily serious. Walter looked at Celeste with an expression that was surprised but not alarmed, like he'd been half expecting something, just not sure what shape it would take. "You didn't call," he said. "I didn't," she agreed. Owen looked up from his worksheet, and studied her with the frank curiosity of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend he isn't looking. "Are you Dad's friend?" Owen said. Walter and Celeste both paused at the same time. "I'm not sure yet," Celeste said, honestly. Owen seemed to find this acceptable. He looked back at his worksheet. "We have extra," he said. "There's pasta." Walter held the door open and Celeste stepped inside, and immediately she felt the dissonance between where she'd spent the last decade and where she was standing now. The house was not large. The furniture was lived in and slightly mismatched, in the way of a home, assembled around the actual shape of people's lives, rather than any decorating intention. There were framed photos on the entryway wall. A woman who must have been Laura, laughing at something off camera, Owen at various ages, the two of them at what looked like a fair somewhere, and in one corner a photo of Walter and Laura that was candid, unposed, the kind of photo that only happens once. There was a bookshelf in the hallway with medical textbooks on one side, and children's chapter books, stacked sideways on the other, because someone had run out of shelf space, and improvised. On the refrigerator there were drawings. Many drawings, accumulated over what looked like years, held up with an assortment of mismatched magnets. Celeste had a penthouse apartment with professionally curated artwork, and no drawings on anything. She sat at the kitchen table while Walter served her pasta, and Owen explained, with great seriousness, that the worksheet was about long division, and that long division was, in his view, a waste of everybody's time because calculators exist. That's a reasonable argument, Celeste said. Right? Owen said. Walter gave his son a look that communicated gentle disagreement. Owen returned to the worksheet with the resignation of someone who has lost this particular argument before, and expects to lose it again. After Owen was in bed, Walter and Celeste sat at the kitchen table with the last of the pasta, and Celeste explained the situation at Hendrix, the deteriorating metrics, the department's slow decline, the pressure she was under to address it. Walter listened with the expression of someone hearing news about a place they used to love, and can still see clearly even though they've left it. He shook his head. I've given that place 11 years, he said. I was there when my wife was dying. I missed things I can't get back because of that place. And now Owen is 9 and I'm just starting to actually know him. He paused. I'm not going back. Celeste started to respond, then stopped. In her professional life, she had negotiated contracts worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. She had turned around failing departments, and managed board-level crises with a steadiness that had become something of a professional legend. She could construct an argument from almost any position, but sitting across from this man in his kitchen, with the drawings still visible on the refrigerator behind him, and the news 2 large glasses folded on the counter, where Owen had left them, she found that she had no argument she believed in. She left without asking again. She drove home and stood in her apartment for a long time, without turning on more than the entry light. The space was beautiful and silent and enormous, and she had lived in it for 4 years. And it had never once felt like the kitchen she'd just left. She thought about her father, who had told her when she was 17, that weakness was a liability, and that connection was weakness. And she had believed him, because he was successful and certain, and she had wanted to be both of those things. She had built her life on that belief so methodically, so completely, that she couldn't see anymore what she'd built it around, or what was missing from the center of it. She thought about what Walter had said to a stranger in a waiting room, most useful things are irritating. She didn't sleep well. The following weeks were difficult in ways Celeste didn't talk about with anyone. The pressure from the Hendrix board escalated. Red mission numbers in internal medicine were becoming a quarterly report problem, which meant they were becoming her problem, in a very direct and visible way. She brought in a consulting team, which was the logical professional response, and the consulting team generated a thorough report that essentially confirmed what she already knew. The department was missing the institutional knowledge and diagnostic instinct of a physician who had left 2 months earlier. The report didn't use Walter's name, it said, key personnel. Celeste knew what it meant. She kept finding reasons to drive past the auto shop on Decker Avenue, which she recognized as transparently irrational, and did anyway. She stopped in once with a question about her car that was not entirely invented. Walter wasn't there. He'd been in that morning, someone said, with his son. She sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes, and then left feeling foolish. Then one afternoon she drove by and saw Walter's car in the bay. And Walter, himself visible through the shop window, talking with the owner, while doing something to an engine that looked considerably more complex than a standard check. She watched him for a moment through the glass. He was explaining something to a mechanic standing beside him, gesturing at a component with the focused patience he'd used when talking to Owen about long division. The same manner, she realized. The same quality of attention. She went in. Walter looked up and said, "You're going to wear out the tires driving past this place." She stopped. "How did you?" "Jerry mentioned a woman in a gray blazer came in asking about her car," he said. "You don't drive a Subaru." She sat down. They talked. Not about Hendrix this time, about other things. About how Walter had found the freelance consulting work, about the glasses, about Owen's strong opinions on recreational vehicles now. For some reason, about what Celeste's job actually looked like from the inside, and what had drawn her to it originally, before it became what it currently was. She talked about that last part for a while, and then caught herself and looked slightly embarrassed, which was an expression he suspected few people had ever seen on her. You don't have to explain yourself, he said. I'm not explaining myself, she said. I'm clarifying. What's the difference? She thought about it. I don't know, she said. Owen came into the shop at 3:30, dropped off by the school bus at the corner, dragging his backpack with the particular tired energy of a 9-year-old on a Thursday. He saw Celeste and his face rearranged itself into something approximating enthusiasm. He dumped his backpack on the waiting room bench, and immediately began showing her something on a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a drawing of a spaceship, with what appeared to be a very stressed-looking pilot. That's me, Owen said, pointing to the pilot. The spaceship is going too fast and I can't slow it down. What does that mean? Celeste asked. Owen shrugged. I made it in art. Mrs. Kenworth said to draw how we're feeling. He considered the drawing. I think I was having a fast day. Celeste looked at the drawing for a long moment. I have a lot of fast days, she said. You should draw them, Owen said seriously. It helps. After that, Celeste started coming by the shop in the afternoons. Not always, but regularly enough that Owen started leaving drawings on the waiting room bench when he knew she was coming, folded in half, with her name written on the outside, in very careful block letters. She kept all of them. She didn't tell anyone she was keeping them. She put them in the inside pocket of her laptop bag, which was the closest thing she had to a personal space at work. One evening, while a thunderstorm moved through and nobody was driving anywhere, she and Walter sat in his kitchen after Owen had fallen asleep on the couch under a blanket, and she said something she hadn't planned to say. She said, I don't know how to do this. Walter looked at her. Do what? Any of it, she said. Be here, be whatever this is. She looked at the table. I've spent my whole career becoming someone who doesn't need things, and I was really good at it. I built the whole system around not needing things. She stopped. And now I'm sitting in someone's kitchen at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, listening to a 9-year-old's theories about space travel, and I don't want to leave, and I don't know what to do with that. Walter was quiet for a moment. He looked at Owen asleep on the couch. He looked at the refrigerator with the years of drawings on it. He looked back at her. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. It's just true. You can let it be true. She looked at him. Something in her face changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way light changes when clouds shift, the quality of it. People don't survive on strength, he said quietly. They survive on connection. Every single patient I've ever treated who found their way through something impossible, that's what they had. Not willpower, connection. Celeste sat with that for a long time. Outside the rain came harder and then eased, and Owen slept, and the kitchen was warm. 3 days later, the Hendricks board issued a formal pressure memo to Celeste, requesting an immediate resolution to the internal medicine situation. It was the kind of memo that came with an implied consequence. She walked out of that board meeting, took the elevator to the lobby, walked to her car, and drove directly to Walter's house. It was a Friday evening. She didn't bring a contract. She brought a single envelope, handwritten. Something she hadn't done since she was in her 20s. Before she learned to let her assistant handle correspondence. Before she learned to keep everything at a professional remove. Walter opened the door, and she handed him the envelope. He opened it standing in the doorway. The rain from earlier in the week had left everything slightly damp and glittering under the streetlights. He read it in the light from his own porch, and she stood there, and for a moment she was 17 again. Terrified of being wrong about something that mattered, which was not a feeling she had much tolerance for, and was standing inside anyway. The letter said what she'd actually meant to say for weeks, which was different from what she'd been saying. It said, she had treated the people working under her the way she'd been taught to treat everything, as variables to be managed, rather than human beings with lives that extended beyond their output. It said she was going to change that, not because a report recommended it, but because she'd sat in his kitchen enough times now to understand what it looked like when someone made the opposite choice, and what that choice built around itself over time. It said she would build a schedule around Owen's school hours. It said she would create leave policies at Hendricks that she wished had existed when Laura was sick. It said she would not ask him to come back, and then quietly expect things to be the way they were before. Because the way things were before was the thing that had made him leave. And then at the bottom, in smaller handwriting that was slightly less steady than the rest. It said, "I know this isn't just about the hospital. I know what I'm asking anyway." Walter finished reading. He looked up at her. "Owen's going to say you're his friend now," he said. Celeste laughed, a real one, not the composed professional variety, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with composure. "I know," she said. "Are you prepared for that?" he said. "He has opinions about a lot of things. He told me to draw my feelings," she said. "I've been doing it." Walter looked at her. She was not smiling exactly. She was doing something more complicated than smiling. "I accept," he said. He paused. "On the condition that the drawings on the refrigerator stay." She looked at the refrigerator visible behind him, years of Owen's art held up with mismatched magnets. "I wasn't going to touch those," she said. He held the door open, and she stepped inside, and Owen appeared from the hallway in his pajamas, looking at both of them with the unhurried certainty of a 9-year-old, who has understood something that neither adult has found words for yet. He looked at Celeste. He looked at his dad. He looked back at Celeste. "Are you staying?" he said. She glanced at Walter. She breathed out, 4 counts, the way he'd taught her in a waiting room months ago. "For a while," she said. Owen nodded once, with the gravity of someone ratifying an important agreement. Then he went back to bed. Walter returned to Hendricks the following Monday. His title was different. His hours were structured for the first time in 11 years, built around a person outside of work, who needed him to come home before dark. The department improved, not because of heroism or extraordinary effort, because of sustained, unhurried attention, which is what Walter had always been good at, and what the place had been burning through for a decade. Celeste pushed through leave policy changes over the next several months, that the board resisted, and she outlasted. She sat through meeting after meeting, with the patience of someone who had learned, recently and at some cost, the difference between strength and endurance. Some things she had to fight for. She fought for them. She didn't mention it much to Walter. He noticed anyway. Owen got a dog. This was not directly related to any of the above events, but it happened in the same period, and was, by Owen's assessment, the most significant development of the year. The dog was a 3-year-old mutt from the shelter named after a character in a book Owen was reading, and he was badly behaved and deeply beloved, and had strong opinions about the couch, which he was not allowed on, and was always on. On a Saturday evening in late November, there was a department dinner at a restaurant downtown to mark the first year since Walter's return. Celeste came with him. Owen was at a friend's house, which he had informed Walter was a sleepover, not a playdate. "There's a difference, Dad." The restaurant was warm, and the room was full of people. Walter had worked alongside for years. And someone made a speech, and there was applause, and Walter stood quietly near the window, while the city lights moved beyond the glass, and felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. That particular, unremarkable completeness of being in the right place. Celeste came and stood beside him. She wasn't touching him. She was just there, looking out at the same window. "Owen texted me," she said. "He says the sleepover is going well, but Marcus ate 6 pieces of pizza and it's a lot to witness." Walter smiled. "He'll be fine." He also sent a drawing, she said. She showed him her phone. It was a crayon drawing, photographed slightly crookedly, a house with a lopsided chimney. 3 figures in front of it, the middle one small, with glasses that were rendered as 2 large circles. All 3 figures were smiling, which Owen indicated in his particular way, a straight horizontal line, and then a curve going up on both ends, the same smile on all 3, slightly uncertain in execution but unmistakably intentional. Walter looked at it for a moment. "He's been drawing that house for about 6 months, he said. "I know," Celeste said. "He showed me the early ones." She paused. In the first version, there were only 2 figures. Walter looked at the drawing on the phone. He looked at her. She was not saying anything else. She didn't need to. Behind them the dinner carried on, voices and glasses, and the easy sound of a room where people are not pretending to be fine, because they actually are. And Walter thought about Laura, the way he did sometimes without warning, not with grief exactly, but with the specific quality of missing someone, who shaped everything you became, who would have had strong opinions about this moment and, probably several useful things to say about it. He thought she would have liked Celeste. He thought she would have liked the drawings on the refrigerator. He thought she would have had thoughts about the dog on the couch. He thought about Owen, 9 years old on a Tuesday. Sitting on his own front steps in his backpack, waiting, he thought about the distance between that evening and this one, and how that distance had been made, not by any single large decision, but by a series of small ordinary choices to show up. To the kitchen table, to the park bench, to the auto shop, to the door. The strongest thing Walter Briggs ever did was not the diagnostics or the board meetings, or the negotiations. It was sitting down at a table with his son and staying there. Everything else followed from that. Outside, the city glittered, and went on being itself, indifferent and beautiful, the way cities are. And inside the warm room, among people who had learned to be honest with each other about what they needed, Walter Briggs was not alone. And for the first time in a very long time, neither was she.